Prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. We come before you this day as we pray for our nation and our elected leaders gathered in this place. Remember those who assist in their work as they deal with the issues affecting people. You have guided us through national and personal challenges in the past. Be with us today. You have blessed our people in so many ways. Therefore, fill us all with the knowledge of your holy word. As it says, to whom much is given, much more is required. Amen. Lord Jesus, you are the master of life. Everything is yours. Just a touch from you restores the sick, heals the broken, and transforms anxiety into hope. Only you can do this. Only you. So we once again ask that you will be with Nancy Bradshaw, a daughter, friend, colleague, and representative of your people in this honorable chamber. May she sense your presence. May she feel your power. May she feel our genuine concern for her welfare as we pray for healing and restoration. May we all know that your love for her and for us is so amazing, so divine that you land our soul, our life, and our all. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
This House is now in session. Minutes of Tuesday, 11th of September.
Minutes of the proceedings of the meeting of the 11th of September 2018, which have been circulated, be taken as read. Second.
Seconded.
Make the second.
If there are no corrections or observation, then let those minutes stand confirmed.
Honourable Speaker, Deputy Speaker, sorry. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers.
Report of the Transport Authority 2008 to 2009 and the annual report of the Transport Board 2009 to 2010.
Notice it. Government notices, private members notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills. First reading, final appropriation.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the final appropriation bill 2018. Notice of this bill, 2017-2018 bill 2018.
Make the second.
Is it right?
Question is that Those bills be read first time. All those honorable members in favor say aye. All those members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Standing orders number 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Seconded.
I beg to second that.
Question is that those standing orders so mentioned be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. Honorable members in favor say aye. Those against say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 5, sir.
Okay.
In the name of the Honourable Attorney General, to resume the debate on the second reading of the Offences Against the Person Amendment Bill 2018.
Member for St. Philip West.
I want to lend my voice to this debate. This has been, for many Barbadians, a very ticklish subject. Whenever we have conversations in regards of the death penalty, views, to my mind, are very varied, and oftentimes those discussions are very heated. I can recall, as a youngster, growing up in rural Barbados, listening to my parents discuss these same matters that we are discussing today. The difference is, back then as a child, I would have been totally influenced by the decisions or the comments of my parents. Many years later, I think, as I've grown into my own person, and I begin to form my own opinions of such things, I would have changed my mind about how I view such matters. I would have been one of the first persons to believe that once one is convicted of murder, that yes, then there should be a death penalty. But with more understanding of some of the things that may lead to someone committing a murder, mitigating factors that are never taken into consideration as it is done in Barbados and in, I may say, many jurisdictions across the world. I think as man evolves and as we become more aware of the shortcomings in some of the things that we took for granted as we grow up, there's time for reflection, and there's also time for change. I believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that what we are seeking to do today is to bring some clarity, one, to the issue. And let me say, for those listening, that this is not about abolishing the death penalty. And I want to make that abundantly clear. This is not about abolishing the death penalty. This is simply about giving the court, giving the judge the opportunity which has not been given to them in the past, to be able to have an alternative in terms of sentencing. What we have and what we've been saddled with for eons, maybe centuries, who knows, is that once a person in this country, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of the circumstance under which the act was done, there is no recourse other than for a judge to give a mandatory death sentence. This, my friends, is wrong. Let me put it plain. It is wrong. And why I say it's wrong, allow me to create a scenario, if you will, that may help in some way to give you a better understanding of some of the things that are possible. Having been involved in social work most of my life, one might think that I would have a soft spot for such things. But the reality is, persons that I would have worked with in my own life have varying problems, some of which would have been learning disabilities, mental illness, these sort of things. But to get back to this scenario, imagine this. You have a young man in the prime of his life, 18, 19, 20 years old. He has a learning disability. He also has other mental issues. But he finds himself with another person who leads him into a situation where, let's say for instance, they break into a home and they're looking for something just to steal. But the young man with the learning disability is given a gun and told to stand by the door. And anyone who comes through the door, shoot them. And I guess, believing that the order came from a good friend, looking out for his best interests, he stands by the door and he watches and he waits. And a family comes home the same time, 2 children and mother. Mother opens the door, the child runs in. What happens? He's been given the order, anyone who comes through the door, shoot. And following the instructions of his friend, he shoots. Child, primary school, probably for the very first time, dies. The other person involved goes away. No one knows who that is. No one can find him. The young man with the gun goes before the court, charged with murder, found guilty, and all that is left for the court, the judge, is to hand him a mandatory death sentence. Colleagues, stop for 1 minute and think about this scenario. How can one not take into consideration the incapacity of the person who pulled the trigger to think, to reason out, to do the things that you and I would take for granted? Where, if in the name of vengeance, where in the law is there anything that says vengeance is mine? There is nowhere in a 2018 Barbados that we can continue with what some will term as old Mosaic laws that say an eye for an eye. If that is all that we can do in 2018, it says that we have found ourselves in a position where we cannot think for ourselves. We have not evolved, and that we place very little value on life, but that we are as bloodthirsty as the gladiators in the Colosseum. This is not the Barbados that I know. This is not the Barbados that we should want the rest of the world to view us as. The time has come where also we must, and I stress the word must, be seen as being able, as a small developing country, to stand up to our obligations. So that if, as some of my colleagues have alluded to before, that we have signed on to conventions with such institutions as the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and also that the CCJ has ruled that the death penalty is unconstitutional. The mandatory, death penalty is unconstitutional. Thank you. Then we have to decide which side of the fence we are going to be. Are we going to be the kind of country that says, yes, we signed on to these conventions knowingly, and they are binding, and that we are going to stand by what we signed on to? Or are we going to backtrack in the name of, in my own words, vengeance? Today, I believe, colleagues, that we have one choice in this matter. We may have varying opinions across the country, and that is what life is about. Being able to agree to disagree. But on this particular matter, it is incumbent on this chamber to do that which, in my opinion, and my humble opinion, is right. That which is right by the country, having signed on to these various conventions. That which is right by the individuals, such as what I just mentioned, that they have the chance for some sort of mitigation. And I want to give you an idea of some of the territories in the world who hold on and maintain this mandatory death penalty. And I want you to think. You see the news, you read, and understand the difference between a 2018 Barbados and some of the territories that I'm going to list. Afghanistan, Iran, Kuwait, Libya, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, just to name a few. What kind of Barbados are we prepared for the rest of the world to view us as? What kind of a people are we if we do not give persons who are accused or convicted, rather, the opportunity for mitigation in circumstances that should be relevant to the various cases, but are made irrelevant only because the legislation says that if this act is done and you are found guilty, there is no other recourse than the death penalty. United States of America has been in the forefront of changing this particular way of dealing with murder. In fact, they have gone so far as to have varying degrees. So you can get murder 1, murder 2, murder 3, varying degrees, which, I am told, will have different sentencing surrounding them. And let's not fool ourselves. Many of us look towards the United States, Europe, and other more developed territories for guidance in certain matters. I believe, in some respects, we have picked up a lot of the not so good things, but on this occasion, I believe that this is one of those things that Barbados must move towards in the future. So we have a choice. Are we going to allow for the judiciary to be hamstrung by legislation? Or are we going to do that which, again, I stress, I believe is right, and give those charged with sentencing options? Options that can very well save a human life. Off the bat, I want to state categorically that all life is valuable. I am not in agreement with anyone being able to just viciously murder someone and walk away scot-free. That is not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is, in the same way that none of us in this chamber would want anyone who viciously, with intent, with malice, without provocation, but premeditated, murder any friend, relative, or anything, or anyone else that we know. We must not be seen to be doing the same thing in our courts. And so I want to lend my support to these amendments. I hope that as the discussions go along, that the general public, too, will understand that the death penalty is still very much part of our laws, on our books, but that all we are asking for is that it moves from being the only option left in cases of this nature. And I don't think that that is too much to ask of a reasonable, well-educated set of people. I do not think that Barbadians have become so callous or so bent on revenge at all costs that they would not understand what it is that we're seeking to do. And the good thing about it all, if I could use such a word as good, is that this, in a way, gives us two things. One, we're able to comply with CCJ rulings, and historically, we would have, before the CCJ, we would have had to have this done by the Privy Council, which again, in my mind, would be us going to the old colonials for advice when the old colonials themselves have moved away from this very thing. But this is more about us as an independent people being able to make decisions for ourselves, by ourselves, in fairness to ourselves. How can you not see, and I use the word good again loosely, but the good in what it is we are seeking to do? The second part is with options, depending on the gravity of the offense, the death penalty is still part and parcel of that sentencing. So there's no reason for any reporter, any person who may intentionally or otherwise want to create controversies or chaos, as we see almost every possible day. It is just for them to accept that as man evolves, as man knows more about himself, who he is, he becomes more compassionate. He moves away from being the tooth and claw survival of the fittest animal that people oftentimes say we've moved away from that. That this is also a part of ourselves, moving away from that type of behavior. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to say that I have all confidence in my fellow Barbadians that they will thoroughly understand and appreciate what it is that we're seeking to do here today. And I know that all right-thinking Barbadians, just as I am going to do today, will support this or these amendments. But before I sit, I want us to reflect on something that we're going to have a serious conversation on in the near future. That conversation has to start as to why do people commit such heinous crimes against each other. Where have we fallen down as a society in being our brother's keeper? What are we doing in terms of going into potentially troublesome areas and putting the resources in terms of the social workers and the social programs and the programs that speak to conflict resolution in a different way? These are the things that are going to solve the problem of this sort of violence against each other, not the death penalty. And so with that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm obliged.
You're welcome. Member for Christchurch West Central.
I rise to give my unswerving, committed, unequivocal, unrelenting support to this amendment, namely the offenses to the Persons Act 2018. And I want to congratulate the Member of Parliament, my colleague from Christchurch East, who brought this amendment to Parliament last week and did an excellent job in presenting this amendment in his simplistic way, so that persons like me who is not steep in law could understand clearly what we as a government is trying to achieve. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the word mandatory, let me put it under the microscope. That is all this legislation is seeking to change. Mandatory. Mandatory means compulsory, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It means essential. It means binding. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this world of imperfection, how can we have a law that commits persons to the death penalty that is mandatory? That is the question that is asked. And that is why in the Joseph and the case of Cadogan and the cases that were brought before the international and the inter-American court, and my good friend from Christchurch, he's here able to lend me a hand. He said, the Inter-Caribbean, Inter-American Human Rights Court. And in 2018, the matter of Severin and Nervier, Jabari Nervier, both of those courts, those international institutions, Mr. Deputy Speaker, struck down the mandatory death penalty. And we are saying that we, as a signatory to those international bodies, we are just toeing the line. So the change in mandatory death penalty is something that has international blessings. And we are saying that we are moving this country forward because we still have an international community that is watching every single thing we do. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was a promise made, and now I'm saying today, it is a promise kept. And I want to also say, because there are some in this August chamber, some in my constituency, who believe, Mr. Speaker, in the Bible saying that I and the Member of Parliament for St. Michael West will tell me that is the book of Matthew 5 verses 38. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that only holds true if the person who commits the crime is guilty without reasonable doubt. And I'm saying the only way we can know that that person is absolutely guilty is if we have an absolutely perfect system, which we don't. I'm saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you commit a person to a mandatory death penalty, and if I want to use the vernacular, if I'm allowed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and then neck get popped, how can you tell them sorry, Wayne? Or tell their families, sorry, Wayne, they made a mistake. We have seen, and I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there are a number of cases that have went before the High Court where persons were committed under this same act, which were struck down by the learned judges of the High Court and reduced to manslaughter. Unless, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we become political shamans and speak to the spirit world after you then commit a person to death wrongfully, how else can we say sorry? I am saying it is legislation that should have been brought to this August chamber ever since. According to my colleague from St. Peter, it should have been brought over the last decade. But it was made to understand that there was an attempt to bring it. And the person who sat in the seat, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that you are now sitting at, there were some issues as it related to him. Although a lot of persons in Barbados believe that he should have been given the death penalty then. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will not go into that. No, but for whatever reason, the legislation was not passed, and we are saying today that as a government that is responsible and responding to the needs of Barbadians, that we are going to ensure that justice is not only seen and heard, but it is served in this country, and it is served for the good people of this country. And there are a lot of things, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that have been lost in the last decade of governance. A lot of things. And when we hear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because there's only one legislation that was sitting idly by, where nothing, absolutely nothing. Persons believe that the government of that day sat on the steps and ate nothing cakes, because we have had no progress, not only in terms of legislation, but in terms of the socio-economic development of this country for the better part of 10 years. And that's a fact. So, when I hear persons, the fearmongers, naysayers, and troublemongers say that we as a government are sitting down and doing nothing, and that we are the worst thing, when you hear them every day, since fungi exists on bread, I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, these are the things that we are doing to improve the livelihood of Barbadians. When we came to governance in 2018, the 24th of May, we were at the bottom of the socio-economic chasm. The Member of Parliament for Christchurch East Central, he can attest to the fact that there were billions of dollars missing in this country. I called the term looting the other day, but it's worse than that. There was pilferage at a level never seen before. And we came and we decided. I went canvassing on Sunday, and a constituent asked me if my Prime Minister, the Honourable Member of Parliament for St. Michael North East, if she's the Energizer Bunny. They said she keeps going and going and going. I reminded that person that not only is she an Energizer Bunny, but you have 30 Energizer Bunny working assiduously to improve the lives of Barbadians. I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, when you can deliver onto this country a plan called the RE plan, a plan that is going to retool, a plan to enfranchise, empower, retool, empower, retrain, and enfranchise Barbadians. When you look into that plan and you examine it, and I want to congratulate my colleague, the Member of Parliament, who worked sometimes in the still of the night. A lot of legislation was brought to this August chamber. In the last administration, it's still in the night, but this my colleague from Christchurch East Central works hard in the still of the night to achieve economic recovery for this country. And I want to congratulate him for that. And then you have a plan called the Barbados, the BERT plan, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformational Plan. Plans that you could be in Barbados can only dream about. Plans that are going to bring this country to even keel and to economic recovery. And we see it already, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir. We see the results already. So despite all the criticism, I can stand in this hollow chamber and say that we have worked hard. And we are proud of the work that we have done on behalf of the good people of this country. Not only the economic recovery plans that I just mentioned, but when last, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you heard an increase in pensions. This was done, Mr. Deputy Speaker, under this administration since May the 24th. Look at this situation. Look at the fact that affluence has been returned to the South Coast. Look at the fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that garbage collection that we have moved in Barbados, and the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West had a cleanup program in Brindisi. I'm looking forward to having the same program in Christchurch West Central for the good people of Christchurch West Central. And he promised me that that will happen in the not too distant future. But I'm saying is that we are going to beautify this country. These are the things that we are doing to improve the livelihoods of Barbadians. We just had a 5% increase in these hard times of public servants across the board. That is the things that we are doing. Water is now accessible for rural Barbadians. Where Barbadians could only dream about the possibility of turning on their taps on mornings to get that essential part of their life. Those basic needs. We have returned the basic needs from off the wish list of Barbadians into their homes. And this is something that this Barbados Labour Party should be proud of. I am saying that transportation, which was an issue before, when the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West, when he first visited that ministry, and he saw that they only had 44 buses, they have so much, in working condition. You can look at the numbers now. Look at the terminal that is built, or has been built for the ZRs to bring order to our transportational system. And I want to congratulate him for the hard work he has been doing in terms of reforming the transportational system in Barbados. I want to congratulate him and each member of this Barbados Labour Party, this government. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir. And then there are those, and if I may use the term, I'm not a logo full or let's so full of sorts, but if I may use the term, shenanigans. There's some in Barbados that are walking around, and they are coming up with all types of creative figures about the numbers that are going to be sent home in Barbados. I want to tell Barbadians today that this government is not on a mission to send home workers. We have just opened new sectors, new economies in Barbados. There's the blue economy. And my good friend from St. Michael South is smiling. The blue economy, which is going to open market and job opportunities for persons across this beautiful country. We are going to have islands in the sea. Something that we could only dream about 20 years ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir. We have the green economy. And we are talking, I often hear my colleague, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South, talk about circular Barbados. We are trying to reuse every single possible thing, even what we consider waste. The effluent, we are going to use, even if we use it in terms of biomethane and different gases and things produced, so that we reduce our fossil fuel bills and we can improve the ecology and at the same time our economic standing. These are the type of initiatives that this government, under the visionary leadership of the Honourable Member of Parliament for St. Michael Northeast, this is what we have brought to the table. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is going to be a drive in the alternative energy sector. Whether it is the wind turbine, whether it is the sun, the solar energy sector, we are going to create jobs in these sectors. There's something called Smart Barbados, and we recognize that we have a smart population. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Smart Barbados is going to be realized within the next couple of months, where with a touch of button, and this is what the young people are asking for. Again, another avenue for job opportunities. We are going to have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a recycling industry. I have a young lady in my constituency who is using newspaper to make newspaper art. Something never heard of before. This is the drive that we are going to have in Barbados. So when person's talking about sending home people, I am saying those persons, Mr. Deputy Speaker, those persons who are...
Remember, I was just want you to tie them into how it relates to the offenses against the person that.
Again and there, because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when these persons are working, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they want in the areas, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and in a position to commit these heinous and hideous crimes.
Thank you very much.
So I am saying to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we, the Barbados Labour, the government of the day, and this great party, I can speak of it, we are going to create opportunities because the devil find work for idle hands.
Exactly.
And we are going to create opportunities so that the young people in this country can put down the weapons of destruction and pick up the tools of empowerment. That is what I'm speaking about.
Thank you.
In this August chamber. That is what this government is committed to, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I am saying that, and now that you ask me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the trust loans, another initiative under this government. And when persons say that we are sitting down on our laurels and doing nothing for the people of this country, I am saying today, nothing could be further from the truth. But my good friend from St. Michael, West Consier, and allude to the fact that John 8 verses 44 says the devil is a liar. And when he lies, he speaks in his natural and forgiving tongue. I am saying that the lies that are being exposed across this country certainly do not do justice to what is happening on the ground. And what is happening, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that we are creating opportunities for persons so they can find an alternative to crime. So we will be here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, having to debate this bill. All we are debating in this bill, though, Mr. Speaker, is one single word, the word mandatory. That's what we are debating in this bill. And the honest truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that it can really take 5 minutes, if so much. Because as I said, the precedent is already set. And I'm not a lawyer, and I understand it fully well. I just spoke about the moral side to look at it. And as far as I understand that, in order for a crime to attract a death penalty, there must be a mens rea and actus reus. There must be the mind and mental and physical element for the crime. But Mr. Speaker, we go a little bit further. I'm no lawyer, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but we go a little bit further. We are saying not only must there be a mens rea and actus reus, but we are saying that the murder that was committed, in order for a person to be sentenced under the new legislation that would hopefully be passed sometime this evening, that the murder that was committed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, must have a high level of brutality. That's what we are saying for it to attract the sentence of murder. We are saying, Mr. Speaker, that the murder involved must have lengthy planning, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We are also saying that the deceased person was a judge, magistrate, director of public prosecution, legal officer. I ain't see politician here, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I see that the person, my colleagues are laughing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That the deceased person was a member of a group of persons who have a common characteristics, such as race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion. And this was a factor in the commission of the offense. So there are certain categories, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which would attract the death penalty under this new legislation. We are not saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we are going to abandon the death penalty or we are going to take it off the books. We are saying that in its current state, it is really nonsensical. It does not follow the international guidelines, and it has no effect on the ability for us to carry out our legal functions. That is what we are saying. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to digress before I wrap up, I am saying that we as a government, that we are going to create opportunities for our young people so that they can move away from the life of crime. That is what we are as a government, that's what we are committed to. And I am saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the program which is going to be implemented in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the building blocks. That program, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is going to allow young persons in this country to put down the knives and the guns and pick up the tools that are going to empower them so that they become effective, efficient, and successful blockpreneurs in this country. And that is what we are working on in my ministry. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and when I hear persons criticize this program that is seeking to help the most vulnerable in this country, I have to raise my eyebrow. Because the moral test of any government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is how it treats its most vulnerable in the society. And the young persons in this society, those in the dawn of their lives, those are the most vulnerable. And when we talk about the young people in this country, those are the important elements. Those young people are the cog, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is going to pilot this country into the next generation, into the next millennium, into the next, and the next, and the next millennium. And if we don't treat them with the type of guidance and facilitate their needs, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Barbados will be Barbados no more. And I'm saying today that the implementation of the program, the project, is going to be rolled out within the next couple of weeks, where we are going to bring idyllic business centers to Barbados. And Barbados need a beautification. Whether we agree or not, Barbados need a beautification across the board. And we are saying that we are not only going to put businesses on the blocks to enfranchise young people, we are saying that there's a beautification element to it, where we are going to add to the aesthetics of the communities. We are going, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to be beautifying the areas and add to the cosmetics with plants, whether they are gardening plants, whether there are plants for food production. We are going to change the nature of the blocks in Barbados. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are committed to it, and we are going to ensure that those young people not only have a voice, but that their voices are heard loudly and decisively across the length and breadth of this country. And I would die saying that there is no better pool of talent and creative talent than that in the minds of our young people. And I say so without apology. And it's how we treat to those young people. And when we talk about a national first job initiative, Mr. Deputy Speaker, those same young persons can own businesses on the same blocks. When we talk about a national consciousness, we have to speak to the most vulnerable, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that's what we are seeking to do. We have to enfranchise Barbados. The last research study done in this country indicate that 30% of school leavers, 30%, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are unemployed. The numbers over the last decade probably went up to about 50%. But I'm saying, out of those 30%, 70% want to be entrepreneurs. And we are going to provide that opportunity under this government. That's what we are working hard, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to achieve. How we treat those in the dawn of their lives, how we treat those in the twilight of their lives. And my member of Parliament for St. Thomas, she will tell you how hard she works. With all the sinew of her being to ensure that those in the twilight of their years are taken care of. The Minister of the Elderly I'm speaking to. I don't think you're making reference to the young Minister of the Youth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have to pass that moral test as a government. And I'm saying today that I am happy through the Member of Parliament for Christchurch East and inadvertently through the Attorney General of this country to bring such a legislation. And in closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because time is of the essence, and we have to get this legislation, because Barbadians, we have to work hard for Barbados. And we have been working hard over the past 4 months. But I think that the problem is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that persons saying these things being done, and they couldn't believe. It seemed almost that they are living in a different sphere. Because here it is in 3 or 4 months, we have done that which the other government could not imagine to do, even if they had the best dream in Barbados. I am saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that a lot of persons like to romanticize with the word, with the number 100. You always hear about 100 days. And the government's performance in 100 days. And this in 100 days and that in 100 days. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there was a song in 1961. I should think the singer was Gene McDaniels. And he said with 100 pounds of clay, he created and he was able to put smells on a lot of, he said 100 pounds of clay. He created, what he created, I see members, the men in this August chamber laughing. Made the life worth living. I am saying, in 100 days, this government, this has made the lives of Barbadians worth living. And I am saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, don't mind the sound, because I know you are laughing and you will know why you are laughing, but he created with 100 pounds of clay. He was able to do that. And I am saying to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 100 days, we have done almost that wish that Gene McDaniels sang about. We didn't create a woman, but we created something that Barbadians can be proud of. We created the Riri initiative. There is the BIRT program, and I'm saying to Barbadians, continue to journey with us, because we are going to continue to rescue, rebuild, and retrain, retool, and enfranchise this good country, Barbados. And to that end, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm obliged.
Thank you. Just want to remind members that we are looking at the offenses against the persons, the constitutional amendment, the penal reform, and the criminal procedures bill this morning. Just to remind members. Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am grateful for the opportunity to add my 2 cents worth to the $1.50 from the member for Christchurch West Central. I want to say that I wholeheartedly support the amendment to the bill. I think the member for Christchurch East did a fantastic job last week on explaining about what it was about. So even if I had a doubt in my mind on what it was about, he made it so clear with the rousing references that he put forward. And I now agree and continue to agree that there are extenuating circumstances that could or should avert a death penalty verdict. That being said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the other issues that I think I need to bring up, things like the speed of process of the courts, and this extrapolates to the rest of the government business on the whole, the civil service. And I am pleased to see that our government is doing something about it by hiring more judges for now to get rid of the backlog. But there has to be something done with respect to the speed of process of cases. I myself have been called into court 7, 8 years after an offense was committed, when I would have seen somebody in my office. And thank God for notes, a lot of people won't be able to remember the circumstances. Things like that need addressing. Things like, I know of instances like rape cases is not murder, but to some people it's as close as murder, where rape cases knock around. I know a 12-year-old girl, case has never come up, she's about 20 now, and she sees her attacker every day walking the streets, and that has not come up yet, and things like that need to be addressed. And there are more than one of them out there that I know of personally. And although the members for St. John and St. Philip West and Christchurch East would have given you rousing examples of people that would have committed murders, and for whatever reason they deserve to be off, I have to bear in mind the victims in these cases, where it might not be murder, but other heinous crimes. I have to bear in mind that families are ripped apart almost every day because of crime. I know of a family, 4 boys, and the dad locked the mom in a room and killed her. She died, he went to prison, and was to become of those 3 boys? They were raised with a grandmother who died. When I saw them this year, one was trying to work, the other 2 became delinquent, blocked people on drugs. You still have to bear in mind that there are circumstances that involve the victim. It can't always be about the offender. I know of daughters that were raped and dropped into wells here in Barbados. We had a few of those cases. These are the things we need to think about, and apart from a murder offense, we have to look at letting out people on bail who have committed these issues, these offenses. We have to look at that. I don't think that people should be given bail, and hence the process needs to be fast. Because in cases of innocence, you really don't want to keep somebody there for 7 years before a case comes up. The other thing that I have a problem with, I think the prisons and the courts must not appear to be prejudicial. The rich, the poor, white, black, Indian, everybody should suffer the same fate. If they do a crime, they do the time, or whatever punishment is meted out. And right now, I think the Barbadians are being disappointed and disillusioned and think that only the poor black people can suffer prison terms and be punished in this way. And in their view, the rich or the rich white people, I don't want to sound racist because I'm not, but they appear to be getting off. We have to look at these issues. The other thing is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think prisons should be a place where the thought of returning should never enter somebody's mind. And right now, that is not the case. I have met people that told me straight, ready to go to a fight, "Doc, I don't mind, prison not made for animals. Doc, I don't mind, I got friends in there." It has to be a place where when you go in, the punishment meted out to you, you have no idea or thought or even dream about going back to prison. And right now, I cannot say for a fact that that is the case. That is not how we are living right now with prison. It has to be more than 3 hots and a cot. It has to be more than 3 hots and a cot. It has to be more than going and play dominoes. And I do speak to people that come out of prison, so I'm not saying this willy-nilly. It has to be more than playing dominoes and cards in the yard. They have an expansive land area around Dawes Prison. In my mind, the prison should be self-sufficient, at least in food. There is too much land around Dawes that people cannot, the prisoners cannot do agriculture. They used to do it along the highway years ago. We have the bushing programs that the government is trying its best to find money for. There are prisons up there playing cards and dominoes. Use them. That should be part of the punishment. But they should be able to provide themselves with food, animal husbandry, crop agriculture, things like that need to be enforced at the prisons to take the burden off of the public sector. Then there are issues of parole. I think parole needs to be instituted, it needs to be studied, and we need to figure out how to apply it. And I think that is one of the reasons why there are repeat offenders. There has to be a system. Yes, I congratulate the prison on the CXC programs and the art. They give very good art and woodwork. We all know this. That sell for a pretty penny in many cases. But there has to be a system where prisoners are prepared to enter civil society again, where they can go into jobs and fit into society, fit into their families. Some of these men go back, not very many women, but some of these men go back to families who have moved on. The children are now big. They can't understand who daddy is. And I think we need to get a parole system apart from the book education to get these people flowing back into society as seamlessly as possible. The other issues I find, the member for St. John, the honourable member for St. John last week spoke about the delinquent fathers. He referred to them as sperm donors. The problem I have with this, and I believe he's right in some cases, but let's be fair. Barbados has been a society that was raised on, and I hate the term, but I will say it now, on single-parent homes. Many of you, I'm sure some of you at least, have been brought up in homes where you just had a mother. And single-parent homes, in my mind, not only extends to families where the father does not live in the same building. We came up with what you call it, village ram phenomenon. Yes, the rams provided for the children financially, but it was the mother who was there. The mother was the arbitrator, the teacher, the nurse. everything. And many people came up in that kind of environment to be very active members of society, useful members of society. So I have a problem when we put all the blame on the men. The women have to bear some of it too. Ask yourselves, where is the PTA attendance at schools? You could go into almost any PTA and you can't find 5% of the parents there to find out what's happening to the children. Those things, ask yourself that. I am now seeing a phenomenon of $200 bags in primary school. School bags are not a book in it. Books can't be bought. It starts at this level. It starts at this level, and mothers have to bear some of the blame. We were brought up, not so much me, Benny was little, I guess, a bit of it, where the whole community contributed to the family. If you got home early, you could stay at your neighbor. They give you some food. That's not where we are now. I have canvas parts of St. Philip North, in the heights and terraces, as you like to call them. And neighbors don't know who lives beside them. Somebody living beside them for 5-10 years and they can't tell you the name. That is not what Barbados used to be. And it can't only be about the so-called sperm donors. As the leader says, the PM says, we all have to bear some of the weight. And this does not only apply to economics and the financial part of the government, it has to apply to everything else. I am not a Bible person, as I always say, but I remember the phrase, go to the ant, thou sluggard. But there are many things you can look at the ant for other than that. If an ant has a piece of bread, one not gonna lift it. Half the colony goes and helps. We can do the same thing. We need to do the same thing to get Barbados back to where it should be. I know I was told that there were 62 people in prison for murder, 62 men, I guess not many women. That's unacceptable, and some of them, I believe, the murders were committed however long. These are things we look at. The death penalty evokes emotions, all types, anger, sadness, everything. Religion comes into it, how upbringing comes into it. The death penalty stands. As the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, the argument is not about the death penalty. But what I would say is that we need to come out of the hanging thing. Hanging is antiquated, and I see something there about suffering. Hanging is something that I have a problem with. I always used to be against the death penalty until I got a little bigger and realized some of these crimes that were committed. But there has to be a way, I believe, something more progressive like the lethal injection, where there's not one man to pull a lever and have to live with killing somebody the rest of their life, where there's a lot of automated things. I think that needs to come here. And it needs to come here and not get cobwebs. We got too many people killing people and know willfully and know that they will sit in prison and enjoy the rest of the days. There has to be a fear. You have to be terrified of going under these. Well, no, it's the hangman. And that is not what we have now. Many in there, we have had cases, that was what, maybe 2 years ago, where people came out of prison being there for murder, got let out and went and killed again. This is where the parole comes in. This is where the punishment that fits the crime comes in. I think sometimes we do more for people that have done menial crimes than the people that have done murders. But these are the things we need to look at, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think the measure, the amendment is good, and I support it wholeheartedly. Judges need to have the ability to weigh the case properly. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that much. There are circumstances that everybody said that would allow people, they don't deserve it. We know that, but some do, and we need to not just be word-of-mouth people, not just be, what's the word? I know what I mean to say. It can't be all about talk. It has to be about action. So these are the kind of things we need to get back. In essence, what I'm trying to say, we need to get back a society where we have good examples ahead of us. We just had a whole government, and I can't pick one that's a good example for our people. I don't know that I could pick one. And this government has to maintain it in earnest and continue to do the people's work. We need to get there. The red will wear off. We cannot lose ground, and we cannot lose hope. We cannot lose the focus where it's not about us, it's about the people out there. It's about our children that are going into prison. We have to keep that focus and just do our work. That is my 2 cents worth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank you.
Well said. The member for Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise to make my contribution to this debate, the amendment against the Person Amendment Bill 2018. And this indeed is a very, very important debate. It is important and it is sensitive. Sensitive because this question of the death penalty cuts across all barriers, all spheres of our society. And there's significant divide at the political level, legal, social, and all the manifestations of Barbadian life. If you go into any household, go into school, into business, into the church, into any organization, there will be people for and people against. And so it is not surprising then that in a country like the United States of America, for decades, each state had its own law in relation to the death penalty. And some did not have it, others did. And it took a Supreme Court decision of 1987 for the federal law to abolish the death penalty. And even within the deliberations of that decision and the decision which would have been reached by that Supreme Court, 6 justices of the court voted for and 3 justices voted against. So this, for me, is a clear example as to how sensitive this issue is. In the United Kingdom, where our laws generally emanated from, you would recall that from the Anglo-Saxon days up to 1965, the death penalty was enforced in Great Britain, and it is only through the Murder Abolition of the Death Penalty Act in 1965 that the death penalty was suspended in Great Britain. And even though it was suspended in Great Britain, Northern Ireland was excluded from this. And how did they arrive at that in Great Britain? Well, there was a homicide review advisory group comprising judges, academics, and former Queen's counsels, legal luminaries, who determined that mandatory sentences did not allow for sentences to match individual crimes. And they even cited an example where so-called mercy killings were equated with serial killings in terms of the punishment of death. Other parts of the Commonwealth, Australia in 1973, they abolished the death penalty. And in 1976, Canada removed the death penalty from Canadian criminal law. But what are we talking about when we speak of the mandatory death penalty or sentence? And this is important because I think it is very, very vital that we differentiate what we're doing here in terms of the abolition of the mandatory death penalty from the death penalty itself, because there is a significant difference. And my understanding of this is that at present, the mandatory death penalty removes any discretionary powers on the courts and other sentencing authorities, so that they cannot or are not allowed to take into account any mitigating circumstances relating to the characteristics of each individual offender, circumstances relating to the facts of the offense. And so, obviously then the penalty is mandatory, it's death. And that is what we are dealing with here today, as opposed to the death penalty itself, which then allows the legal system, the judiciary then, to be able to have the discretionary powers based on the evidence of the case and based on the characteristics of the offenders. And how did we arrive at this? Well, we are debating this bill today because the Caribbean Court of Justice, which is the highest court of appeal for Barbados, declared the mandatory death penalty in Barbados to be unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. And according to those findings, the court stated that Barbados, that it was indisputable that Barbados, through its actions, had acknowledged that it had an obligation to remove such mandatory penalties from Section 2 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, and that Barbados had also given undertakings to the CCJ and to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to rectify the mandatory death sentence. So, here we are faced with this situation, a situation in which for the last 25 years or so, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights was trying to get all of its members to do exactly what we are seeking to do today. We also have a situation, as I outlined, where other Commonwealth countries decades ago abolished the death penalty. But the truth is that Barbados is not a country that follows other countries because of might. We do what we consider to be necessary for the citizens of Barbados because it is their right. And so we've reached the stage now where we have to deal with this issue. Our country is a country with a legacy of upholding the law. And if the Caribbean Court of Justice has made such a ruling, then we have an obligation to carry out and to follow that ruling. And it cannot be a case where we will agree with the CCJ when it suits us as a government or a party, and then condemn the same CCJ when it does not suit us. So that we were in agreement and we supported the decision taken by the CCJ in relation to the right of Commonwealth citizens to vote in Barbados. And this Barbados Labour Party government intends to abide by the rulings of the said court in relation to this matter. We have a legacy of upholding international law, and we shall do that. This Barbados Labour Party government intends to be consistent in all that we say, consistent in all that we do. And although at this time, yes, we are abiding by the ruling of the CCJ, this is also part of the comprehensive review of our justice system that we spoke to in this manifesto that we put before the people of Barbados. And I will quote from the manifesto, and it states, in terms of bringing justice into the 21st century, that those who go to our courts or are in the criminal justice system must feel that there is justice. This extends to those working in the system, those who are victims of crime, and those who are perpetrators. Our systems must be made more efficient, transparent, and less time-consuming. We will move from colonial models of justice that focus on punishment. We will concentrate on creating a framework for restorative justice. This is the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party. This is what we are doing. And it encompasses several aspects, all operating and all being executed simultaneously. For example, like the creation of family law courts, like the extending of the number of judicial courts by 2, I believe, like the digitization of the court process, and all of those things that we are seeking to do to make our system more efficient, more transparent. So this falls right into that category. But I also refer to the covenant of hope that the Barbados Labour Party presented to the people of Barbados before the calling of the last general election. A covenant of hope which we intend to live by. And that covenant of hope articulates very, very clearly the Barbados Labour Party's view as a government now that we will not take action on any matter that is sensitive, such as the death penalty, by deciding in this parliament with 30 people, and in terms of the abolition of the death penalty itself and other such related matters, that we will allow the people of Barbados to have a say in that determination by referendum. That is a decision that we took. That is a covenant that we've made with the people of Barbados. And so that differentiates that aspect of it, which is the abolition of the death penalty itself, from what we are doing now, which is the abolition of the mandatory death penalty. So that is the difference. That is a point that I really want to make. I also believe, like my colleague from Christchurch, West Central, that, and if we could look at this situation in the same way that we look at NCDs, which we consider to be a threat to our society, we need to look beyond the penalty and the sentencing and even the conviction to look towards the root of the problem and to find ways and means that will allow us to reach our people so that they do not end up in this situation. That is vital also. So that all of the social impacts, all of the things that contribute to the perpetration of criminal activities of this nature, these are the things that we need to focus our energy on, even more so than dealing with the death penalty itself. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And so I would like to say to all Barbadians that this is nothing to be afraid of. We believe and we promote and we advocate the freedom of the judiciary. And what we are seeking to do, as ordered by the CCJ, is to do exactly that. What am I talking about? We have a situation where the judiciary is free. That is what we say. Yet we have a situation where we create or place an impediment on the judiciary itself in terms of not giving them the latitude to deal with the death penalty because of what we now have in place, the mandatory death penalty for certain offenses. So what we are doing really is to restore the freedom and the rights of the judiciary so that those with legal or judiciary authority can now have the discretionary power to do what I believe was intended when we gave the judiciary freedom, total freedom. So it's a constitutional matter, yes, but it's also a matter of doing what we consider to be the right things for Barbados and for what we stand for. And so I don't think that this should create any great debate in terms of being for and against, because it is not the death penalty itself, it is the mandatory death penalty. And so I, as the Member of Parliament representing the constituency of the city of Bridgetown, I give my full support to the removal of or the abolition of the mandatory death penalty in Barbados. I congratulate the Member of Parliament for Christchurch East for clearly presenting this bill. It was enlightening. He shared a lot of information which I found to be very, very useful and which made it very easy for me to be able to support this bill. And at the same time, I congratulate the Honourable Attorney General and his staff for bringing this bill to Parliament. And with those few words, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am obliged.
Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I would want to say a few words in this debate, and I begin by echoing the sentiment of my friend who just sat. And my clear philosophy on this matter, Mr. Speaker, and clear understanding of the matter, first of all, is that he is entirely correct. We are here to look at a process of removing what is essentially a fetter on the discretion of a learned trial judge presiding over a capital matter in Barbados. And that fetter on the trial judge, which has been there from as far back as the creation of the Offences Against the Person Act, is one in which, when once a verdict was returned by a jury, and the jury found against the defendant in the dock, then in spite of any mitigating circumstances that existed and that were raised in evidence in the case, the trial judge had, as a matter of law, to proceed towards a penalty of death. That set of circumstances has clearly had some unfortunate consequences. And we in this region, and not only this region, we across the civilized world, have come to understand that in spite of the fact that you want to have retributive justice applied, and you know we all come out of the Christian background where you have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, etc. And there's a feeling that you must have this retributive justice. Retribution must be paid. The fact of the matter is, that is a mispronunciation of the word. Oh, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there comes a time when you have to look at the totality of the circumstances. And as the law evolves, and essentially what I wish to do in this very short intervention is to speak a little bit to the evolution and why we evolve. As the law evolves, you have to understand, sir, that it is necessary for us to be a lot more humane in the approach that we take to certain matters. And I don't just want to say that in a vacuum, sir, but I want to argue on the basis of cold, brutal fact. I have been party to 2 cases in this country where I stood as counsel for the defense, and in both cases, the accused men went free, and I made no special pleading as to the ability of counsel for the defense. I just happened to say that in both cases they went free. But the reality is, sir, that in each circumstance, there were particularly mitigating circumstances, which if they had not gone free, we would have been faced with a situation where there would have been no alternative in the hands of a trial judge than but to proceed to a death penalty. The first one, sir, which comes to mind is an event that took place at Fisherman's Pub in Speightstown several years ago. And a man left home, collected a girlfriend, went to this event. The 2 of them, according to all the evidence led in court, had a wonderful time partying. One man there, his eye fell on the young lady, and he took a fancy or a liking to her and decided that he wanted her companionship for himself. So, maybe intoxicated, one does not really know because he died, so he could not give evidence. But he made an approach to the young lady in a way that she sought to reject. As a result of her rejection, he became hostile towards her. Now, the gentleman who she went with intervened, as I dare say most men in those circumstances would feel constrained and compelled to do. Having brokered a peace and gotten the man to stand down and back off of the lady, all was felt to be well and good, but then the man comes back again, demanding the woman's attention, demanding a dance, demanding etc., etc. And this is the evidence in the trial from the people who were the eyewitnesses. Eventually, she pushed him and a squabble ensued between him and her, but nothing to do with anybody else. And somebody present escorted the man out of the property. It turns out that as the man and woman leave the nightclub, leave the restaurant, fete, whatever, on their way home now, the person who had expressed an interest in the woman reappears again. Not satisfied that he get put out the people place, he coming back because he is fixated on this woman, consumed either with alcohol or perhaps lust or a combination of both. But mindless as to his behavior. And then when he seeks to pounce on her, the man in whose company she is, the man who's keeping her company that night, seeks to defend her, not defending himself, so it wasn't open to him to plead self-defense. Indeed, what happened was that he ended up taking the life of the man in a squabble because the guy who was the predator attacking the woman broke a bottle, and he managed to take the broken bottle away from the guy and ended up taking his life. Now, one has perhaps two opportunities to lead a defense in that regard. One could argue that it was a provocative set of circumstances, but that is tenuous at best. And then the other one, realistically, is that there's an accidental death. And it is open to the jury to say, no, we don't find that is accidental. You probably intended to kill that man because of whatever. You felt that you were in danger of whatever, being harmed or whatever. But the point is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that the reality is that the circumstances of the case were so compelling that were it not for the finding of not guilty, you would have had a very unfortunate set of circumstances where, yes, a man lost his life, but he lost his life in a situation in which most ordinary people looking at it would feel that the matter cried out for a little leniency, because there were mitigating circumstances inherent in the matter, and they were clearly laid out in the trial. As the law then stood, that would not have been possible. What we are attempting to import into the jurisprudence of Barbados now is an opportunity for a trial judge sitting in those circumstances to look at the mitigating circumstances that are existent on the facts of the matter, and coming out in the evidence that he has heard before him on oath, and then say, in view of those things, I wish to exercise some discretion, and therefore this is not a matter which, in my judgment as trial judge, having heard the facts of the case, is worthy of another person being condemned to death. And frankly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that is a demonstration of the growth and the development and the maturity of the evolving jurisprudential system. I am one who believes in the death penalty. But I also believe that horrific tragedy can be done and tremendous injustice can be wrought on a country when we go down the road of not recognizing that the system is a man-made system. And inherent in a man-made system is the capacity for mistakes to be made. And the unintentional taking of a life by the state, or the committing of a person to a penalty of death by the state in circumstances which were born out of a mistake or a misunderstanding, misapprehension of facts, is something that is, unfortunately, when once it is executed, irreversible and exceptionally tragic. The second instance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, was one where two boys were playing around with a gun that they found at an uncle's house. And playing around with the gun, not being trained in the use of the gun, and the firearm accidentally, in the hand of one, the firearm goes off, and it shoots the other, and he dies. And again, there's no malice between the two of them. On the facts of the matter, these boys were getting along exceptionally well. But the learned Director of Public Prosecutions proffers a case for murder. There is no evidence of a mental intention to do any ill one to the other, no quarrel, nothing like that. But again, in circumstances of that nature, and these are just two examples, and there have been myriad cases of this nature before this country and across the Caribbean. And I think what the region is being asked to do by the learned justices of the Caribbean Court is to come to a point of collective understanding that we cannot just leave these things to chance, that a jury may, and I suspect has in the past, come back with verdicts which would condemn people to death in circumstances which really cry out for the exercise of some discretion, in circumstances which reflect a a level of ability on the part of the judge because of the mitigating nature of the case, mitigating facts in the case, to be able to exercise a discretion and not just have his hands tied or her hands tied and be compelled to issue a judgment that there must be an execution. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I said, I wanted to be very brief, and I just only want to say a couple other things. We must not fail in this debate to recognize that we are not moving forward, and we are not compromising our principles as right-thinking Christian folk who believe as a country that there should be a death penalty, as many people in Barbados believe. Not necessarily all, but I think many, many people believe that way. We are not compromising those principles. What we are actually doing is trying to make sure that a level of fairness comes into a system which inherently was not as fair as it should have been. And the evolution of the law in this matter is something that we must not lose sight of, because the issues relating to the death penalty and circumstances in which people can be deprived of their life is something that has attracted the attention of almost every country in the world. And we are not any different. There was a little while ago when I was first, in fact, 15 years ago, when I was first in the other place, in the Senate of Barbados, we had to deal with an amendment to our Constitution as a result of Pratt & Morgan. The ruling in Jamaica, which says that you cannot hold an accused person without his appeal for more than 5 years. And the fact of the matter is, it was happening all around this region. And we saw it, we recognized it, but a man had been found guilty of a heinous offense, and so therefore letting him rot in jail was the unspoken view of most people across the region. And I dare say that was the case in England as well for many, many years. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when you unearth somebody who was lost in a cell, as the Pratt & Morgan case revealed, and that you find that there were people there for 18 years awaiting trial, but they had been forgotten about, as the Pratt & Morgan case revealed, it asks every one of us who has some humanity to reflect on those set of circumstances and to ask another question: should the law not do better? Or is it good enough for the state to be as unjust as the accused person has himself been? And if we are going to live up to the expectations of being a civilized society in this modern era, then we have to recognize that we can't just lose somebody and forget that they exist for nearly 2 decades in a prison. And that was one of the things that caused us to change a system where we in Barbados had people who had been going without trial, awaiting, gone without appeal for 8 to 10 years. The other thing that we have to look at, and I believe there have been some incremental, I stopped practicing criminal law for some years now, but the reality is that these were things that bothered me when I was certainly practicing at the bar and agitated me coming out of law school because of the patent, obvious absence of fairness. Things like the question of pretrial publicity. Because the fact of the matter is that, and we've all seen this, a headline will appear in a paper that Jeffrey Bostick, not the honorable member, a man named Jeffrey Bostick, get hold for some offense. And there's a front page story telling you where he was and what he was supposed to have been doing, alleged to have been doing, and whatever the offense is. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when put to proof, the prosecution case fails and the accused, Bostick, goes free. But the headline that was there compromises him and his reputation for life. Worse yet, the unfair nature and the prejudicial nature of the pretrial publicity is that in some instances, people in a jury remember the headline and form a negative opinion about the accused man even before the case has begun. And no matter how strenuously and robustly the defense counsel puts a case, they are remembering that which the paper or the television or, in this day and age, the social media and whoever else has what they have told them. And that colors and tarnishes the image that they have of the accused man, and then the accused man has an uphill battle, and the scales of justice do not hang in the balance evenly, because he, in the minds of the people who have formed that jury, has been a person who they saw on television or they read about or whatever that did these horrific things, and don't care how much he tries in this small island, he will not get the benefit of doubt. And that is something that the evolution of the jurisprudence has started to take into consideration in larger societies, and I believe that we're not going to escape that in a meaningful way for much longer. And again, of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question of pretrial disclosure, where we have people who are in the process of a trial, but not necessarily fully in possession of all that the prosecution wanted to say about them. Now, we have come, I concede, a long way on that matter, and nowadays it is more common to have a full disclosure of that which is said against you. But you have to beg for it. And very often, your ability to get it in a timely manner varies from judicial officer to judicial officer, who, quite frankly, some judicial officers will, because they're human beings, have their own views on these matters and may have their own prejudices. I do not know. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the evolution of the law, especially on matters which carry the heavy weight of the consequences of taking a person's life, when the state has given itself the authority to take a human being's life, then we have to make sure that the law so evolves as to ensure that we have put in place the safeguards that protect against mishap and unfortunate developments which can incur perverse outcomes. And as much as, I mean, I am an attorney, there are several attorneys in here, but as much as we may love the law and practice the law, we also have to be frank about what the law is. And the law is quite capable of making horrific mistakes and has made horrific mistakes. And in the instance of a death penalty, it is a mistake that cannot be corrected. And so therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think that it is important for us to recognize the context in which this very useful intervention comes. It is nothing that Barbadians of good Christian intent, Barbadians who believe in the preservation of human life, Barbadians who believe that if you have done wrong, you should be penalized. And I saw a comment attributed to the leader of the opposition, let them hang. There are several people who have that view. This does nothing to change that reality. What this does is to make sure that a trial judge does not have his or her hands tied when it is somebody's little boy or little girl who finds themselves in an unfortunate situation that cries out, begs out, screams out for mitigation. But the trial judge, because of the language of the law, does not have any discretion to exercise. And therefore, the law that we seek to promote itself becomes a piece of legislation or a law that hurts rather than helps. And that is what we do not, under any circumstances, want to happen. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I commit myself to supporting this.
Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I stand this morning, well, it is no afternoon, to support the amendment that is before the House, the amendment to the Offences Against the Persons Act. And I rise to support the amendment And in doing that, I want to share a few perspectives. I first want to speak, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the matter of accountability. And that is one of the tenets that this government is based on. We've signed up as a country to be governed by, to allow some measure of oversight by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, Council and Court of Human Rights. And we've also signed up, and I think that was in the late 1970s, early 1980s. My understanding is that in the year 2000, we recognized the jurisdiction of that court, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And in 2005, we would have adopted the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court, final appellate court in these matters, as well as in matters related to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we speak about accountability, whilst the highest form of accountability is to oneself, the real test of accountability is when we are accountable to others. And for accountability to make sense, especially in this kind of situation, there needs to be an understanding that we adhere to the rule of law, as my first point. Adherence to the rule of law allows for all citizens, all persons within the jurisdiction, a certain level of certainty. The rule of law is administered by our Constitution. It is also administered by our courts and our court system. And so the systems that we have signed up to and have allowed to provide oversight for the rule of law in the country, when those courts make rulings, the rulings cannot simply be ignored. Because we as a country and we as a government, we have indicated to the country, we have indicated to the international community that we will govern and we will respect the rule of law in Barbados. There's also the matter of transparency when we talk about accountability. And transparency as it relates to accountability really means allowing ourselves and our actions to be inspected by, to be analyzed by agencies, by people outside of ourselves. And as a country, as a government, we have said and we have committed ourselves to practicing transparency. And so we will place all of our actions, we will place all of our laws, we will place decisions of our courts, decisions of our parliament, we will place them in the court of public opinion, we will place them before the people, we will place them before organizations, because we want transparency. We want that whatever actions we take can be scrutinized by somebody else. We do not take actions, as some people say, in the dead of night or under the darkness of night. I normally sleep at night, but I know the Honourable Member for St. James Central uses that term pretty often. I'm not sure why. But transparency allows us to have all of our actions scrutinized. Rule of law, transparency. Good governance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, means that we will adhere to the rulings of the legal system, of the courts. And so as a country, as a government, as we debate this amendment to the Offences Against the Persons Act, I want to frame everything I'm going to say within that framework of the rule of law, transparency, and good governance. We've adopted the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court, our final appellate court. And so I would want to begin first by saying to the people of Barbados, because I am here and we are here representing the people of Barbados. I would want to say through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the people of Barbados that we have no reason to fear the Caribbean Court of Justice or its decisions. I would want also to say to the people of Barbados that we as a people, we as a Caribbean people, are quite capable of dispensing justice and managing our own affairs. We are capable, we are able, we are intelligent enough. We are no longer at the stage where we should feel that we really should be looking to people who look maybe a little different from ourselves or from the majority of us, or that we have to look to people who live very far away from where we live to get sound, independent judgments in a court. We have, for many decades, accepted the judgments of our own local courts. And somehow there has crept in, maybe it's existed for a while, the feeling that there needs to be a resort to a court that is far away with people who may have a longer experience in law to make final decisions for us. But I'm saying to the Chamber, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and to Barbados, that Barbados in 2018 is capable, as part of the region, of having a final court of appeal in the Caribbean Court of Justice, one that will dispense justice fairly and using good principles upon which to base their judgments. In any case, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, that some persons may still have an affinity for, has already demonstrated that it may not be thinking along the same lines as we may feel it will be thinking. They have already made quite a number of decisions that are not along the same line as decisions they may have made 30 or 40 years ago. But essentially, I want to say to Barbados and to Barbadians that the Caribbean Court of Justice is a court set up and has demonstrated that we can rely on its rulings. Now, the issue at hand as we debate the amendment to the Offences Against the Persons Act is the mandatory nature of the death penalty. And while some persons may have been using this debate, in my view, to score political points, and I don't even know if I should call the points cheap, but we've been elected, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've been elected to conduct the people's business in a serious manner. And all of my colleagues who have spoken so far have been at pains to indicate that this debate is not about retaining or removing the death penalty from the laws of the country. I would also want
Point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because unless I myself am misled, the honourable member is misleading the House. I think if the honourable member is suggesting that this debate is being used to score cheap political points, we have to assume he is referring to the debate taking place inside of this honourable chamber. And unless he's accusing some of his colleagues of trying to score cheap political points, then he is misleading the House, because certainly the humble leader of the opposition has not sought in any way to say anything different from the primary spokesman for the government on the other side.
I don't think there's any point of order found in that one. I will continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the only benefit from that intervention was that I got a chance to sit and gather my thoughts. There is debate that is taking place both in this chamber and outside of this chamber. And while I do not really want to respond to the interruption, I will say that there is in Barbados a feeling in some quarters that this debate is speaking to the retaining or the removal of the death penalty from the laws of the country. And as I was saying before I was interrupted, I want to repeat what many of my colleagues have already said, and that is to say to Barbados, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this debate is about the mandatory nature of the death penalty as it currently stands on our books. The ruling by the Caribbean Court of Justice spoke only, as far as I am aware, to the fact that once a person is convicted for the crime of murder, then the penalty, the only penalty that the judge is able to pronounce, is a sentence of death. The Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that that is unconstitutional because it takes away every discretion and any discretion from the judge. And so we are in a situation where if a person is convicted today or tomorrow for the crime of murder, that person will have to be sentenced to death in a situation where our appellate court has ruled that that sentence is unconstitutional. So a judge is in a quandary in a situation like that. I also want to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that as our laws and our jurisprudence is currently framed, a judge, and I think the honourable member for St. James Central put it well, once a verdict of guilty is returned, there is no method of determining whether, as in the American system, it is a murder that will be considered, according to their rules, murder in the first degree, or murder in the second degree, murder other than intentional, willful, vicious, etc., premeditated, all those terms. There is no way of determining if it is anything other than the most heinous form of the taking of the life of another individual. And what this amendment, this proposed amendment, seeks to do is to allow a judge, after having, along with a jury, heard all the evidence, after having a jury return a verdict of guilty, that judge is able to take all the circumstances into consideration. That judge is able then to make the determination as to whether he believes or she believes that the crime that has been committed, because the judge is not then saying that no crime has been committed, but the judge is able to determine whether the crime of murder, is of such a nature as deserving of the death penalty, which is still on the books, which he can still sentence the guilty person to. But he is able to determine whether that is the appropriate punishment, or if there is some issue in the circumstances surrounding the murder that would cause him to decide that maybe life in prison or 50 years or whatever alternative would be more appropriate in the circumstances. And that is essentially what this amendment, this proposed amendment, is all about. And that is essentially, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what this debate ought to be about. The debate is taking place because judges currently have no option. And what the CCJ has indicated in its rulings, and what we are saying to the Honourable Chamber today, is that the judge ought to have options. The judge ought to have options based on all the evidence that has been presented in the case. And we have to be aware, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that a sentence of death, a penalty of death, is final. It is irreversible. And so, as human beings, there ought to be situations where a judge is able to, given all the circumstances, make a decision on a judgment, on a sentence that is as final and irreversible as the sentence of death. And I would want to say, because it is a principle of jurisprudence, it is a principle of humanity, that reasonableness should always come into play in a judgment. And so this amendment will allow reasonableness to come into the contemplation of the judge as he or she makes a decision as to what penalty will be enforced. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and maybe the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, my friend, the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, may agree with me on the next point that I want to make. I am absolutely sure that he will not raise on a point of order. Absolutely sure. I've heard many references this morning, well, earlier today, to Christian principles. I've heard references to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I do not want to suggest, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that people maybe stay away a little bit from what they don't fully understand. I'm not saying that. But I want to say that in Scripture, there is not just the concept, there was the practice of, in the justice system, back in ancient Israel, of areas called cities of refuge. The death penalty did exist at the time. But if we read Numbers 35, we will understand that even in a situation where the death penalty obtained, there was provision for circumstances to temper the judgment. There was provision for persons who reach what were called the cities of refuge, not to have to bear the penalty that otherwise existed in the community. And I would want to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that even in cases when murder was committed, and when it was understood that a murder was committed, there was still provision for a person, an accused person, a guilty person, to go to the city of refuge and avoid the penalty of death. Now, I did not raise that. I do not want to turn my presentation, my input into this bill into a sermon. But I thought it necessary to enlighten some of my colleagues who have only read the verse that speaks to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and to really say to them that the Bible is an entire book. You know, there's 66 books in the Bible, and we need to take it as a whole and not just pick out verses that may suit us at the time. But there were other punishments for the crime of murder in Scripture, and so Christians who understand the Bible understand that the penalty of death was not the only penalty for a capital crime. It was not the only penalty. And I just thought, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that for your enlightenment and the enlightenment of the Honourable Chamber, that...
But you're saying Christians who understand.
Well, I don't know if that's a pejorative term. I don't want to suggest that my colleagues don't understand, but not everybody understands in the same way. And I just thought that I have an obligation to explain when I think people are going on the wrong road, even if it is my colleagues. I'm duty bound, and those who sent me to this place expect me, they know of my Christian background, and they would expect me to correct my colleagues and whoever else if I think that they're going on the wrong road. And so I'm really fulfilling an obligation I have to those who sent me here. The death penalty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, therefore, in this proposed amendment, remains on the statute books. That has to be clear. The death penalty remains an option. The death penalty remains an option for the judge in a situation where a jury has returned a verdict of guilty of murder. The death penalty remains. There may come a time when we debate the death penalty itself, but this is not that time. This is not that time, and I think that needs to be made clear. It needs to be repeated so that the people, not necessarily in here, but the people who are discussing this amendment are have a full understanding of what we are trying to do with this proposed amendment. There are a number of issues that are involved or that come to the fore, come to light in this discussion when we are talking about anything related to the death penalty. A question like, does it have deterrent considerations? Is it a deterrent to the committing of crimes? And those are valid questions. And that maybe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is one of the reasons why the sentence remains on our statute books, because there are those who believe that having it on the books provides a deterrent for some persons so that they do not commit that ultimate crime. There's also the matter of justice for those who have suffered loss. And as the Honourable Member for St. Philip North would have indicated earlier, we always, in our actions, in our thinking, when it comes to crimes, have to remember the victims of the crime. And there has to be justice. And I would want to say that there has to be justice not just to the victims of the crime, there's also a justice for the community. There's a justice for the nation that has to be taken into consideration. This government recognizes that justice must be done. And justice must not just be done, but it must be seen to be done. Because one of the things that we would not want ever in Barbados is a situation of vigilante justice. And so a government, a responsible government such as this one, will not want to be in a position where it appears that we are dealing only with the perpetrators in terms of looking out for rights, for their rights, and being fair to them, and not looking after the rights and providing justice for the victims of the act, especially victims of murder in terms of family relations and friends who remain. The public, therefore, can be assured that this government will be a government that will ensure that justice is done, that justice is served, that penalties to society, debts due to society, debts and penalties in terms of the persons who have been the victims, we will make sure that those debts to society are paid. In our covenant of hope, at page 23, we made a pledge to the people of Barbados. And we pledged, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we will follow the rule of law, and we will respect the independence of the judiciary. That was a solemn pledge. We called it a covenant. Some people even questioned the use of the word covenant. But it was because we produced a document that we wanted to be binding on ourselves. And in that covenant, we said we would respect the rule of law. And so, as our final appellate court indicates that a particular provision is unconstitutional, then in our respect for the rule of law, we will be proceeding, as we are today, to make the adjustment that is necessary to uphold the rule of law. And we will also, in the amendment, create the situation where we are not where we're not putting aside the independence of the judiciary. And so we, in this amendment, will be allowing the judicial officer to have the scope to make a judgment and to pronounce a sentence as he sees fit based on the evidence and on the circumstances within the rule of law. That is essentially what we are doing today. And so, because as a government, and because I'm part of a government that upholds the rule of law and respects the independence of the judiciary, I have no challenge at all, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in fully supporting this proposed amendment before this honourable chamber. I commend it to the chamber, and I repeat to the country that the provision for the death penalty remains on our books, but we are simply allowing the judge to be able to make the final decision as he pronounces judgment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am obliged to you.
Thank you.
Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2 p.m.
Somebody second it. Question is that this House be suspended until 2 p.m. All those members in favor say aye. Those against say no. The meeting, the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 2 p.m. this afternoon.